Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Well, welcome back, everybody. It's the Gay Buddhist Fellowship. Today, our speaker, we're honored to have Alan Levin with us. Alan is a longtime explorer of the interface of psychological and spiritual development, social, political activism, and the ceremonial use of entheogenic plants and other substances. He has been a licensed psychotherapist since 1985 and established Holos Institute, a nonprofit eco-psychology training program in California. He's been meditating and teaching different forms of meditation for several decades. He now resides with his wife in Rockland County, New York, and together they work as Sacred River Healing. He's the author of Crossing the Boundary, Stories of Jewish Leaders of Other Spiritual Paths, and leads a webinar series, Staying Sane While Making the World Better. You can learn more about Alan's work at www.sacredriverhealing.org. So welcome, Alan, to the Gay Buddhist Fellowship.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I want to especially thank my longtime brother, Bharat, for inviting me to be here today, and to all of you for opening up your Sangha to my presence. It's a wonderful way to start a talk, to have 30 minutes of meditation, to let go of almost all of my nervousness and let my mind stop rehearsing what I'm going to say and just be here with you in this virtual space where I do feel our presence is still very, very close with each other. And so first off, I am going to be centering what I'm talking about on the issue of the ceremonial or ritual, sacred use of plant substances and other, what have been called psychedelic substances. So let me just start by a couple of definitions. The usual term, the most common term, psychedelic, has been sort of changed amongst people who make use of them these days in what we could call the more serious vein, outside of raves and parties and recreational use. And so there's one class of substances that are called entheogens now. Those are more the classic psychedelics like LSD, psilocybin, ayahuasca, peyote, and DMT, and so forth. And then there's another classification called empathogens, so entheogens, the word is derived from bringing forth the divine from within. Entheogen and empathogen is bringing forth empathy from within. So those are used in somewhat different ways, and I'll get into some of that more, but I just wanted to share a couple of those definitions. When I was preparing for this, I realized this is such a huge topic and has so many aspects to it. And so I feel like I would like to just touch on some of the major themes, primarily from my own experiences, and then be open to questions, which I hope will be I think will be there, lead to a lively discussion. So my own history goes back to the 60s, and I had been a very angry activist, anti-war, civil rights, and social justice activist, very focused on political change. And someone introduced me to LSD, and that began a very radical shift in my consciousness. And so psychedelics have played a very big part in the directions I've taken in my life over the years. And so I started going on a somewhat of a spiritual journey, haphazard, moved to San Francisco, Haight-Ashbury back in 69, and up north a little bit in the Sonoma County area as well, and got introduced to a particular yoga meditation practice, Agni Yoga, in about 1970, 71, and spent about 10 years immersing myself in this deep meditation practice. Then during that time, I wasn't making any use of psychoactive substances, as a lot of spiritual groups at that time and this time, that's sort of a no-no. And so when I did end up leaving that group for a lot of different reasons, I was reintroduced to the more focused spiritual, disciplined, ritualized, or ceremonialized use of entheogens. I can share that it was Ralph Metzner who reintroduced me to that way of working. I say I can share that because he's no longer living and he can't be prosecuted for that. And you can't be prosecuted for anything you say you did in the past anyway. So that began a long journey of finding my way to bring together the meditation practices that I'd been learning and doing, and my work with these entheogenic substances in both individual sessions and in group sessions. And so I can say that I experienced quite a few ceremonies with a group called the Santo Daime, a syncretic Brazilian church. Syncretic meaning that they bring together the more shamanic use of plant medicines and a kind of Christian religious tradition. And they have outposts, centers in the United States now, which are legal and are able to use ayahuasca as a sacrament. So I participated a number of times with them. I did a number of times Native American church ceremonies with peyote, and did quite a bit of the kind of ceremonial group experiences using different substances in what's called the neo-shamanic way, which integrates our kind of Western psychological teachings and insights with the ancient shamanic traditions and cosmology, you could say, of what's real. So that's some of my own background. One of the things I want to just point out that I think everybody sort of takes for granted is that these substances have an effect on the state of consciousness of the person who ingests them or takes them in. That is, something changes about the state of consciousness that you're in. And of course, there's a lot of debates on whether that's a good thing or a bad thing or a useful thing or not a useful thing. But let me just read to you what a state of consciousness is, or at least one version, one understanding of that. A state of consciousness may be defined as the subjective space or field within which the different contents of consciousness, thoughts, feelings, images, perceptions, sensations, intuitions, memories, and so forth, function in patterned interrelationships. So that's a definition of state of consciousness. That comes from one of Ralph Metzner's books. And then he goes on to say what an altered state of consciousness is. An altered state of consciousness is when changes in our subjective body image occur, along with other changes in the perception of time and space. Then we definitely recognize we're in a different state. We're not in Kansas anymore. Most profound are when the sense of identity or self-image is abolished, such as what's called ego death, either negative, and this can be in either a negative or a positive experience. In other words, it can be psychosis or it could be nirvana, madness or mysticism. So clearly, this alludes to the fact that most people now know that psychedelics are very powerful and they can be, in fact, dangerous when used inappropriately and without skill. What state of consciousness any particular drug brings about varies greatly. Just as, and I was thinking this when I never had thought of this before actually, but so does the effect of meditation. In other words, when we meditate, two people can be doing the same practice of meditation, but they could be moving into very different states of consciousness. The same person could be doing the same practice of meditation one day and move into a very different state of consciousness or pass through different states of consciousness differently. And the key that people have discovered, in fact, Tim Leary came up with these terms to describe what is it that really makes the psychedelic experience the experience it turns out to be. And he said, we have what's called set and we have setting. And setting is the environment that you're in. And of course, if you're meditating and you're in perhaps a monastery or you're in a room where you have your whole Sangha meditating together, that's a different setting, let's say, than if you're trying to meditate in your own room or you're meditating in the forest. And likewise, who's there, what sounds are there, what the temperature is like, all of that is the setting, how comfortable physically you are and so forth. The set is perhaps more crucial because it's out of the set that we tend to choose the setting that we're in. The set is everything that's inside, not just inside the head, which is what I'm pointing at, because we usually think of it that way, but inside one's heart, inside one's gut, all of the centers where consciousness exists, which in fact is the whole body and the energy field of the person. So more specifically, you could say those are one's hopes, one's fears, one's desires. What we think of as most important is intentions. The intentions are what in the preparation for an experience of this kind, what we could call a sacred journey, is what we really try to focus on. Because what a person, at least consciously, is seeking will greatly determine what the experience is going to be. And I emphasize the word consciously because it's also quite possible that there are, and there will be, unconscious, that is, aspects of one's orientation that person isn't even aware of. And those can come up in the session and will That's part of the set. So again, set and setting are sort of the critical things to know when one's looking at what kind of an experience is a person going to have. We of course know that there are different substances and there are different dosages of those substances, but in any event, the set and the setting are really what's critical. One could even say that set and setting is what's determining one's experience all the time. In other words, it's the interplay, the chemistry between what's out there and what's in here. So one of the things that I wanted to look at in preparing and wanting to be with you folks is like, what's the relationship between psychedelics and Buddhism and meditation in particular? And I got out my old copy of Zigzag Zen. I don't know how many of you know about this book, but Zigzag Zen came out in 2002. So it's almost 20 years old, but it has a great number of about 25 significant Buddhist teachers who are asked to write about their experiences or what they think about psychedelics and their role for a Buddhist practitioner. And there's quite a wide range. One thing that's not such a wide range is that most of them, and of course this was 2002, these are elder teachers, and so you're talking about the people that are sort of my age, the people who got interested in their Buddhist practice probably in the 60s. And so they were there when the explosion of interest in psychedelics was happening. And I would say most of them that are in this book attribute to a great extent, or to some extent, their experiences with a psychedelic as being the primary motivator for them seeking out spiritual practices and finally leading them to Buddhism. Now, the range starts to diverge there. Like some of them will say, well, thank you. That was a wonderful experience. That got me started on the road, but no more. And none of my students should be doing that. That's at one end of the spectrum. And somewhere on the other end of the spectrum are those who are saying, quite honestly, this is a very, very valuable tool for spiritual awakening and for enhancing Buddhist practice, for enhancing meditation, both in terms of reviving that vision that moves me to do this practice, which can get boring and can get stale, and what also can vivify or give more energy again to one's practice, and others who are somewhere in between, who will say, it's great to get things going, to really get serious about your practice and integrating it into your life. It's best to leave these things alone. There's also debate about the meaning of the precept of Buddhism, which says not to indulge or take in intoxicants that cloud the mind. And of course, the debate there is, well, are these clouding the mind or are these unclouding the mind? Are these actually advocates, of course, of the psychedelic experience, the entheogenic experience, will be very clear that they feel that it opens and clears the clouds that have limited their perception. And so it's not a violation in that respect. Now, I wondered about whether or not that's out of date, that it had swung one way or the other over time. And in looking on the web, I found that there was an article in 2018, relatively recently, in Lion's Roar, Buddhist magazine, and it's entitled "The New Wave of Psychedelics in Buddhist Practice." And from what I gather there, and this is something I'm not aware of, wasn't aware of, there's a very widespread use now in some retreats, Buddhist retreats, meditation retreats, of bringing in maybe a Peruvian shaman for one day, and everybody experiences ayahuasca, or people are using it in other ways to enhance their meditation. They take it very seriously, which is what they should, and they and a lot of this is driven by evidently a new wave of Buddhist practitioners, younger in age and kind of more exposed to the whole entheogenic culture that's out there. I wanted to actually show something. Am I able to go?
You are co-host. So.
Yeah, I can do that. I just wanted to show that's an example of psychedelic art as one of the many paintings of Alex Gray, who is very out front about the fact that he uses LSD and other psychoactive substances like DMT and ayahuasca and others to open up his perception, and then he paints these things. So for him, these are not paintings of chakras and energy systems that come out of reading a text about it. These are actual visions that he has that he then is able to share with people. So there's a lot of beautiful artwork that he's done and other artists have done. So one of the quotations that I took from that article in Lion's Roar by Mark Koberg, he was the executive director of Inside LA. I don't know that group, but it's I think a meditation center in LA or network. Quote, we know that psychedelics are a valid doorway to Dharma practice. It was in the 1960s and still is today. And now there is a renaissance of its use. So lo and behold, there's a resurgence of the use of these substances, not only in the culture at large, but clearly in Buddhist culture. And for that matter, I recently got in touch with a group of Jewish spiritual practitioners who had a Jewish psychedelic summit in which speakers talked about the relationship between Jewish mystical practice particularly and their forms of meditation and prayer and the entheogens. And they had a Zoom conference that had 1,600 people interested and involved. So it sounds like it's moving in many directions. Couple of things besides set and setting regarding what people may want to know, or maybe I don't know this group and how many of you are very familiar with all the things I'm talking about already. But there are varieties of ways in which one can experience and be guided in these sessions. One variation is the question of dosage. Of course, there's a difference of different substances. So you have, on the one hand, you have, as I said, the empathogens, which tend to be most effective for personal emotional healing. And they allow us to experience ourselves with empathy, to look at whatever it is in the dark corners and recesses of our consciousness that might be bringing about guilt or shame that causes anxiety or depression or addiction. And so there's, as you probably know, a good deal of research that's going on now in a number of universities, university medical colleges for the most part, that's legal and sponsored, not sponsored by, but approved by the federal agencies, the DEA and the FDA and so forth, to study using these substances for PTSD, for smoking addiction, for anxiety associated with having a terminal prognosis. So these are taking place at NYU, at Columbia, at Johns Hopkins, and several other schools. And on a much larger, affecting a much larger population of people is what is called the underground movement, which has been continuing basically all during the time that these substances were made completely illegal during the Nixon administration, and put on what's called Schedule 1. Schedule 1 means that nobody can make use of it whatsoever unless there's very, very, very strict procedures, and they weren't allowing that until they began to open that up through people doing lots of serious medical lobbying and making the case that on small scales they could do this kind of research and test out whether it could be so helpful, that so many people had said it was working very well back in the early days before it became illegal. So this large network of underground is where you find the much greater variation in the way people are making use of the substances. In the clinical settings, it's all very, very controlled. They use, synthetic substances because that can be weighed and measured exactly. People are monitored for their blood pressure and heart rate and all of those kinds of things during sessions. Very careful, strict protocols are followed. And whereas what you find in what's called the underground, you have is anarchy, essentially. People are doing whatever they feel like doing. And some of it is, I think, not so great, and a lot of it is really great. And so let me talk a little bit more about the great stuff. As I said, people use different levels of dosage, and that has to do somewhat with the belief about what is best for a person to really have the kind of breakthroughs that they need. And the people that use the very high doses often feel like what's needed is a kind of shattering or breaking down of the ego, the death of the ego or transcendence of the ego, and that's provided in those kinds of sessions. On the other side, there's what used to be called psycholytic therapy, where very relatively small doses are given. The person is still quite cogent, able to talk, but tends to be a little bit freer in what they're able to talk about. So what might take months or a year to get to in ordinary talk psychotherapy, a person is able to access rather quickly. Somewhere in the middle, you have a relatively strong dosage of, say, mushrooms or one of the pathogens. And so a person is in a deep altered state, but they're able to hear, understand, and be guided in certain directions. Now, that tends to be the area that I have experienced the most. It's the area that was developed very, very strongly by my friend and mentor of many, many years, Ralph Metzner. And in it, he would be able to work with a group and guide the group to experience very directly deep mythopoetic aspects of consciousness, you could say. And just as an example, you have the Tibetan wheel of life that has the 6 realms. Some of you are probably familiar with that. The heaven realm, the hell realm, human realm, the animal realm, hungry ghosts realm, the Asura realm. And he would be able to, having done a great deal of practice himself with meditation and study of these Buddhist maps and other maps of consciousness, guide people to, by choice, enter into these different realms of consciousness, be able to see how they relate to their own lives, their own relationships, to their own experience in the world, and recognize, too, the ability to have mindful attention, empathic attention for themselves, even while they were experiencing these realms, some of which are very, very difficult and painful. So dosage is important. Another thing is music, or what's there besides perhaps a person speaking or not speaking. And in some traditions, or some what are becoming traditions in the modern world, people use silence. People essentially take a medicine, is what we tend to call it, a medicine or sacred medicine, and there's just silence. And then they have the opportunity to practice meditating with their breath, with whatever is arising in their thoughts, in their feelings, in their senses, and to be with that. Just be with that. Some use drumming, some use a rattle, and there's rattling going on, or chanting. People that have come back from learning with curanderas or shaman in South America, particularly, will tend to use that method of just having people in a circle or in a group, having the medicine, and then just having rattling or chanting going on. The other question, which I kind of alluded to, is the continuum of how much guiding there is versus the idea of non-intervention. From what I know of Stan Grof's writing, Stan Grof, for those of you who don't know, was one of the very early pioneers, a psychiatrist from Czechoslovakia who was introduced to LSD, and it totally changed him from a very, he's trained in the Freudian model to a very expansive, transpersonal, spiritual model of the mind in psychiatry. And his approach tended to be, when he was doing it, non-intervention. Just let the person have their experience. And others will use touch, will use, as I said, more music to help elicit qualities of consciousness that are important for the person. I know of people who, for instance, will help a person who has had trouble with their one or another relationship, say a parent, and then they will do a process of healing and forgiveness, or opening to that parent, that their father perhaps, and then they would play music that somehow evokes the whole idea of male consciousness, or it could be on the feminine side, and opening to that. And there's music that will help facilitate them just going on that journey. So there's a period of time where there's some talk, there's some guidance, entering into a particular issue or quality, and then nonverbal music, just letting the person go on that journey. So my experience with these medicines and participating in people who have guided sessions for me is that they're very, very powerful, very, very helpful, very, very healing. I'd say the basic questions that one asks in any spiritual quest: who am I? Why am I here? What am I? What am I doing here? These are things that one can get very, very deep insights, not just intellectually, but viscerally and in one's heart on these experiences. And the other thing that I'm hopeful about is that these not only change an individual's consciousness, but they tend to change it in such a way that people feel a kind of motivation, which is natural to us, I believe, from within, to help make the world better. In part, it's because they tend to expand the sense of what we are in this world, that we're part of a web of life, that the animals and the plants and all of nature, Mother Earth herself, the cosmos, is part of our family. And so we're more motivated to be active in defending all of that and protecting all of that and nurturing all of that. And we need more people that are willing and able and energized to do that right now. Because I don't have to tell anybody, how dire the situation is right now with the direction humans are taking us. So I will be happy to hear any questions. I see Thomas B.
Yes, thank you so much, Alan, for bringing us a subject we don't often hear much about. And I have a question. Maybe you can help shed some advice on sort of a dilemma. There are a lot of schools of Buddhism tend to have this deep reverence for the historical approaches and things like that. And so, may come off as a little inflexible or not willing to engage with entheogenics. But I think all schools also agree not to journey on the path alone, to not only be in Sangha, but to find a teacher and stick with a teacher who can help, can help your path and see things that you can't see. And so, if we're looking for a teacher who's open to this, and, they may be much smaller percentages than most teachers out there, it can almost feel like shopping around for a doctor who's going to treat you with the way you want to be treated. What advice would you have for anyone sort of wrestling with this dilemma of looking for a teacher but wanting to go down sort of this path or include it?
Yeah, well, you're asking maybe specifically if a teacher or guide who is both a Buddhist teacher and one who's open in this way to the exploration with entheogens?
No, not so much, looking for, a directory or somebody specific to be referred to, but just, how should one approach trying to balance this? Like maybe we're part of, a Zen and a great community or something, and it's just not there, that can be something that one might wrestle with.
Yeah. Well, that's I think the answer. You might want to wrestle with it, and you might want to, just open to the possibility that there are folks that you can connect with. You might want to check out that article in Lion's Roar, because I was really surprised. I mean, some of this is going on at major Buddhist centers, including Spirit Rock. It wasn't a secret. It was right in there in the magazine. So it has names of, I know you weren't asking for specific referrals, but, some of the people that are involved in that kind of work are right there. And and it seems to be a growing movement within the Buddhist community.
Great. Thank you.
Sure. Lee?
So I have a pretty similar question, and maybe it's somewhat duplicative, in which case you can just go by it. But I've been interested in this for a while. I am fairly old. I'm 82 now and generally good health, but nevertheless, mortality is approaching for sure. And I've had 4 people that I had connections with die this year. And in any case, even aside from that, I've long been interested in the nature of who the I-ness is in relationship to existence. And it has occurred to me before that this is one way to explore that. And so I too am interested in somebody, and I don't specifically care whether they're Buddhist or not, though I would want it consistent with the Dalai Lama as my only religion is kindness, to provide some sort of somewhat controlled guidance to doing it. I have tried mushrooms once. That was with a former partner quite a while ago. That was interesting and did have some of that. And I've tried LSD, but in such small quantities, it probably didn't do much. Anyhow, so how does one go about finding that, preferably someplace in this area?
Yeah, I really can't go there in terms of anything specific. I think if you really just start talking to some people about it, and it's all around you, you'd be surprised. But I would recommend definitely looking around, because further than the first contact, because there are elder guides. There are people who have been doing this for some time, who are really very skilled and can be very, very helpful. So I hear you, and I hope someday soon this will not have to be so undercover and secret and so forth. I would imagine if you're in the Bay Area, there's probably a great deal of openness even of people who are doing that kind of work, because it's kind of accepted. And in fact, in Oakland, I understand that psilocybin mushrooms are now legal. So people can walk into a dispensary and actually buy them. Whether that's a good idea or not a good idea, I'm not going to say, but definitely that would mean that guides who work with those things, as well as cannabis, can be very open. Yeah. So
good.
I hope that helps. Bharat.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alan, for being so candid and sharing so much with us. I didn't know some of the history, and I definitely couldn't name off the 6 realms of the Buddhist wheel of existence. Thank you for that. I was wondering, in your work, how you've handled clients in the past, of course, that had, rather than a positive experience, really couldn't get through the struggle, really had maybe clearly went into psychosis or versus spiritual emergence. Could you talk about that?
Well, the people that I know who do this kind of work, one, are pretty careful about screening and preparing people for the process. And a big part of that preparation is learning tools to be with whatever arises. Essentially, meditation tools, mindfulness as a primary practice, and then sometimes energy channeling, energy opening tools that come from Taoist or my own tradition, which is Agni Yoga, Tantric Yoga, other forms of practice. So that it's rare, it's really very rare I honestly haven't seen it where a person has had like an episode that turned into like really a traumatic experience. But if it did, certainly it would be important to have integrative sessions as well. And I know that many of the people who do this work that I know of or heard of also have sessions after the actual journey experience. So there's preparation sessions, there's the journey time itself, and then there's integration time. And again, using tools of meditation, of attention focusing, one learns to process the experience and learn from it. Mm-hmm. Does that help?
Yes.
Yeah. If some people have experiences that seem like at the end of it, it's not particularly traumatic, but something's unresolved, something isn't completed. So like they are working on healing a relationship with an abusive parent or a neglectful parent or a broken heart from a relationship that they had. And they unearth some of more of the pain than they even knew they had. But I would imagine you would think as well that from a Buddhist perspective, that's a good thing. It was there, but they weren't aware of it. So now that they're aware of it, they can continue the work of resolving or processing in whatever way they need to within, or maybe in having communication with the person that they're having the trouble with externally.
Yeah, thank you. That fits with the people I've known who've done the research studies at universities. It was all about the preparation, of course, the experience, but also the post-processing integration. That's key. So, thank you.
I had a question, Alan. It's like, in terms of accessing like the subconscious, is that a matter of dosage or is it a matter of intention? I think part of the fear that I have had in the past is, just sort of having uncontrollable experiences. And so I'm just wondering if that's a matter of, trying to keep it in the realm of the conscious, maybe, is that just a matter of dosage, or?
Well, I would say that what we call the empathogens are the best bet for that. In other words, substances like MDMA and 2CB and a whole range of others that are similar molecules, what they call the phenylamines, they tend to reduce fear of whatever's available to you or whatever you need to see. And so you have your questions about what you want to look at and what you want to heal, what hurt there may be inside, or issues you want to look at. And it seems to give you the openness to be able to do that, open-heartedness to be able to do that without fear. The other substances at lower doses, it's true. You can have more control of what you're doing. Control in this sense is not a bad thing. In other words, it's the ability to choose where you want to focus your attention.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Gracia?
I think we have time for one more question.
Okay.
With Grisha. Thank you for your talk. And just coincidentally, last night I had dinner with friends who, one of them had just come home from a journeying experience, and the other one is working with a physician secretly, of course, because it's illegal, to microdose on mushrooms to cure depression. Mm-hmm. So if anybody in San Francisco is interested, I could, potentially connect you with someone who's doing that work. my question, they're trying to encourage me to do it because of my struggles with depression and also like my lifelong, quest for spiritual or higher power presence that I can't seem to find anywhere. And, my concern is that I'm a recovering drug addict and alcoholic, and my use of all those substances were all recreational in the past, and I feel this fear that it would trigger addiction. The other two people that I'm talking about, they assure me that it's not, it's not addictive, it's spiritual, it's medicinal. Get it out of your mind that it's drugs. So I don't know. Do you have any quick comments about that? Any experience with addicts trying it?
No, it's certainly a concern, and it's certainly something to approach then with care, mindful attention, and be working with somebody who understands your situation and what you're worried about and rightfully worried about. But actually, the reality is that several of the entheogenic substances have been used to help people who are currently addicted get off and often are able to maintain. It was one of the findings of the very early LSD research that was looking very, very promising. They were working with alcoholics and having relatively good results. And this was before a lot of the methods of working with the substances were even developed. But so there's studies being used to show ayahuasca as an agent for helping people get out of addiction, psilocybin as well. So I think, the possibilities are very promising for it to be very helpful. And yes, proceed carefully and mindfully. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alan, for a fantastic talk. Really provokes a lot of thought and inquiry, I'm sure. So we are supported by your donations, which go to help us pay for rent on the Buddhist Center and provide meals once a month to the Larkin Street youth, and to publish our newsletter, which goes largely to people who are incarcerated. So any and also to provide dana to our speakers. So any donation you're able and willing to make, I've posted a link in the chat. You can go to gaybuddhist.org and there's a donation page there, or you can send a check to GBF. The address is in the chat. Does anybody else have any announcements?
Yeah, I just want to say again that for those of you who aren't on the email list or weren't at the previous groups where we've talked about it, the regathering at Bartlett Street unfortunately has been delayed until at least mid-November. So people have been asking.
Which brings up also that we will be having a one-day Zoom meditation retreat. We won't be able to have our in-person retreat this year. So I believe that's on November 13th.
Yes.
With Stephen Turney. So keep that. It's a Saturday, all-day retreat. Any other announcements? Okay, so we also meet on Wednesday night. It's the same Zoom settings, 7:30 on Wednesdays, for a meditation and group discussion. So, Alan, would you like to do the dedication of Mary?
Sure. So we open our minds and our hearts and our senses to all the allies in the web of life, that this work that we're doing today and throughout our lives is for the benefit of ourselves and for all beings. We include in that the animals, all the varieties of animals, the plants and the fungi, all of the stones and mineral realm, our ancestors, all humans. And again, we ask that this be for the benefit, the well-being, the safety, the awakening of ourselves and all beings.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for being here today, for joining our Sangha.
Thank you.
Please return. We're here every Sunday. And thank you so much, Alan.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thanks, guys.
Bye, friends. See you next time.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.